Hey guys, welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Alexa and welcome. Today we're talking about a different topic than normal. I don't really have anything written down or any notes anywhere, so I'm just going to kind of be going from memory. But today we're going to talk about my epidural labor versus natural labor. Hopefully if you're watching this and you're kind of on the fence of whether or not you want to go epidural or no epidural, this will kind of help you. I've had two labors. One was with an epidural and one was without an epidural. And I just kind of wanted to go over like the pros and cons, go through each of my stories and kind of the takeaways that I had from them. And kind of just give some perspective if anybody is pregnant and planning their labor, not sure if they would want the epidural or not. Maybe this will help provide a little clarity for you. So without further ado, let's get into it. I want to preface this by saying epidural or no epidural, all births are births. I feel like there's some negativity on the internet about like, oh, going natural versus going epidural. And I'm here to say that both are hard and both make you a mother. So I really don't want to like make people feel bad or make people feel any type of way. Whether you decide to go epidural or no epidural, either way, you are bringing a life into this world. And I think both make you a very strong woman. So I just wanted to quickly say that. Let's go through kind of both of my birth stories. I have two kids. I have a daughter and a son. My daughter is 3 and my son was just born a couple of weeks ago. So I wanted to quickly go through each of their births. So for my daughter, I had her at 39 weeks in 3 days or 4 days. So full term, very close to 40 weeks, normal size baby. All that kind of thing. And for her, I did not get an epidural. So I'm going to kind of go through like her birth story, kind of how it was, and then also kind of how it was postpartum. So for my daughter, I went into labor naturally. My water actually broke on its own earlier in the day that I actually had her. I went to work that day. My water broke, but it was trickling, but I didn't believe that it was broke. I had kind of gaslighted myself into believing that I was not going into labor because I had been told so much like, oh, first time moms, often you think you're in labor, you're not in labor. Like you really just don't know. So like you probably are in labor, even if you think you are. So my water broke earlier in the day and I didn't think that it actually broke. So I went through the full day at work and I was having kind of like inconsistent contractions until the end of the day where I was starting to get something going that was a little bit more consistent, but I didn't really want to believe that it was labor because I just didn't think it was because I had gaslit myself, like I said. So at the end of the workday, I started to realize like, okay, I think I might actually be in labor. And I called my husband and was like, okay, I think I'm in labor, but I don't think I'm actually like in labor enough to go to the hospital yet. So I went home, I cleaned the house, I was just keeping myself busy, occupied. My contractions started getting closer together. And my daughter was born in December, and it was actually the first snowstorm of the year. It started snowing like crazy. My husband came home from work. He was like, should we go? Should we not go? And I called my midwife, and I was like, listen, I think I should just come in. And she was like, no, no, no. Like, you're talking through contractions. You're fine. You're fine. And I was like, listen, I just want to come in because it is snowing. I don't want to be caught in the snow like as it gets worse and worse and have to drive into the hospital. I'd rather drive in now. If you tell me it's not real labor, then I can relax the rest of the night and just like have my contractions and chill. So I went into the hospital. It took us a while to get there because of all the snow. And when I got there, I believe I was 4 centimeters already. So they checked me in, said, you're in labor, you're good. And my first labor, I really just didn't want to get an epidural. And the reason why I didn't want to get an epidural was because I was very scared of it. And I think that's very common. I think a lot of people are very scared of it, including myself, obviously. So my first labor, I did not get an epidural. The things I loved about that labor were at the hospital, you know, I could move around freely. I did intermittent monitoring. I don't remember if it was like every hour, every 2 hours. At first they did like the 2 little monitors, and then after 30 minutes or so, it looked like she was taking the contractions well, so they took it off, and then they just had a little Doppler that every once in a while they just checked her heartbeat. So I got to labor wherever I wanted and however I wanted. I used the peanut ball. I went in the tub for a long time. I kind of like went around the room. I was able to do whatever I want. I wasn't connected to anything. It was fantastic. And I also got to push in whatever position I wanted. Overall, it was really, really ideal in terms of labor. I would say the pain was manageable. I did get a shot of something towards the end just to like take the edge off, but it wasn't anything crazy amount of pain management. It was just kind of to take the edge off. The con is obviously the pain, but I do feel like I handled it very well. I feel like I wasn't like freaking out or panicking in any sort of way. I felt very calm, relaxed. The thing that I did not like about that labor was the end. The ring of fire, obviously, not great when you don't have a lot of pain management. But also right after labor, I felt terrible immediately. My body felt like it was ripped apart. I really didn't tear though. I had a lot of like micro cuts. I forget what they called it, but like I had a bunch of different like micro cuts down there, which was really uncomfortable. But one stitch, maybe two. I don't think I didn't have a degree of tear at all. So yeah, I think the worst part of that labor was definitely the end and then also the immediately following. And postpartum, I was extremely weak. I had a really hard time postpartum. It took me weeks to be able to like walk and be able to be normal. And I'm not sure, it's hard to say like what things came from like, going naturally versus epidural and what things came from like my first labor versus my second labor. The first time, your body is like in this like shock state and it's harder to recover. And I do think the second time it was easier. Don't know if it's epidural related or if it's like, natural related. So that being said, I do feel like my recovery was really, really bad with my daughter. I was in a lot of pain. It took me a long time. My husband was helping me immensely. Like I barely could walk to the bathroom. I barely could move. I was in pain for a good amount of time after having her. And I felt really out of whack for a good amount of time after having her. And I don't know if it was also because my pregnancy with her was very, very easy. I had some pains, but it wasn't bad. I was sleeping well. I felt like it was a really easy, idyllic pregnancy. And then postpartum, I was just in a world of pain. So that was my experience with the natural labor. With epidural, I had a different experience. At my 37-week appointment, I started realizing literally that day or the day before that I was having extreme itchiness. My hands were itchy, my feet were itchy. And that's how it started. And then eventually it was spreading over my whole body where my arms were immensely itchy. It was almost unbearable amount of itch. It was the most uncomfortable I've ever felt in my life. If you scratched it, it almost made it worse as well. So at my 37-week appointment, I mentioned this to my midwife and she got me tested for cholestasis of pregnancy. And I believe the whole name is like intrahepatic cholestasis of pregnancy or something like that. The initial test came back and it looked like I probably didn't have it, but we were waiting on the last test, which was a test of my bile in my blood, I believe. It was above the normal amount, which meant I had to be induced. The following day, I came into the hospital at 5 a.m., was induced, and it was a completely different experience as a whole from my first. Because with my first, I went into labor naturally. It was, my body's decision to go into labor, whereas this time I was forcing my body to go into labor. So I also want to preface this with saying that I had a lot of pain this pregnancy that I didn't have with my first one. At first with the pregnancy, it was a little bit better. I wasn't nearly as sick in the first trimester. I was feeling great. Then all of a sudden it hit me like exhaustion, pain, hard to sleep, couldn't stay asleep, and just like immense amounts of pain for months on end. Like my back, so much pain, my ribs, so much pain, hard to breathe, shortness of breath, felt very faint because my blood pressure kept getting dangerously low. So it was just not a fun pregnancy for me. That being said, got induced because I had cholestasis. So they had to monitor me at all times and monitor the baby at all times. Because I was being induced, I was constantly hooked up to medications. I had like an IV in my arm at all times. And it made it a lot more difficult to move around and be comfortable, but also being at the hospital from start to finish was taxing mentally. With obviously my first labor, I was able to, work, and then I went home and I was able to clean, keep myself busy, and like take a shower and be in my own home. And then with this pregnancy, it was like, okay, I'm sitting here for hours just waiting for things to happen. So I started off with like certain medications to get my labor started. I didn't have to do the balloon or anything. That worked for me. And then I was put on Pitocin. The weird thing this time was that the Pitocin, I thought immediately I'd have like terrible contractions or something, but I really couldn't feel them. I was contracting regularly, but I could not feel them. Eventually it got to the point where I definitely could feel them, but it was very manageable. I think around 5 or 6 centimeters, I was really debating whether I wanted the epidural or not. My reason for wanting the epidural was mainly because I was afraid of the Pitocin. My water didn't break on its own this time because of being induced, I feel like. So I was really just really, really, really nervous about the Pitocin once my water broke. I'd heard from a lot of people who had been induced that once their water broke, the Pitocin like made their contractions extremely painful. So that's the reason why I decided to go with the epidural, was because that placing the epidural was the part that made me the most scared. I was very nervous. I don't really like things going in places where I can't see, especially like my spinal cord or like my back. So I was very nervous, very shaky. I was like, after they finished, my hands were like shaking so bad because of how nervous I was. Placing the epidural, I would say it's about as painful as placing an IV, I would say, like in your arm. So it's not the worst thing in the world. I felt like it was very uncomfortable, and they had to kind of replace it a couple times, and it still didn't work properly. So for me, they like put it in and I could tell it was too far to the left. And then they put it in again and I was like, I think it's in the middle, but I'm not sure. It was really painful when they were like moving it around, when they were trying to place it correctly. I did not feel comfortable when they were doing that whatsoever. And I don't think that's normal. From what I hear, like I don't think it's super normal to have pain while they're moving it around, but maybe it is. I'm not sure. But I will say that it's very uncomfortable. Did not love it. Was not a huge fan of it. Yeah. Yeah. I would say like overall, is it less painful than contractions? Yes. But is it not painful? I would say it's medium level of pain. For me, the epidural started working and I could only feel it on my left side. My right side felt completely normal. The way they test, like, if it's working or not, they take a little ice cube thing and they, like, touch your back in different areas. And if you can feel the ice cube, like, the same temperature, like, they'll touch it on your arm and then they'll touch it on, like, your back. And if it feels the same, then it means your epidural's not working. So they actually had me flip and lay on my right side and try to get it to, like, flow into my right side. It didn't really work, though. And it worked a little bit, I would say. It was starting to work a little bit, but as I got closer and closer to when I would be pushing, I felt more and more feeling coming back into my right side. So they actually upped my dosage right before I pushed, to try to attempt to get it to flow into my right side. The way they explained it is like they put an amount in there and it kind of like coats the area and makes it numb. But then they can push more into that area and it kind of can like fully fill it so that it can get both sides. All it really did was make my left side more numb. So it did kind of help a little bit, but it wasn't super great. As for, pushing, I only pushed for like 20 minutes and then he was out. It was pretty fast. But also I could really feel it. Like I thought the epidural would like, from what I've heard, a lot of people, it's just like you feel pressure, you don't feel pain. I definitely felt pain. I definitely felt pain. Was it better? I would say it was less pain than with my natural labor. It did help a little bit, but it was still very painful. I would say that the best part about the epidural for me personally was the after birth. Like, I really felt like I had a much better experience postpartum and I healed much, much quicker. And I don't know how much of that is from the epidural, like I'm not in as much pain when I'm pushing. Maybe I'm pushing better. I don't know. Or how much of it is from, my second labor. Like maybe my body was more prepared and felt better. I'm not sure. But I definitely had a better experience postpartum, and like immediately following the birth, I felt much calmer. I felt much more relaxed. It was a much easier atmosphere. The downside of my afterbirth this time was that my placenta didn't completely come out, which is not good in terms of like risk for hemorrhaging. So they got my placenta out and then they noticed that it was broken in places kind of. So there were chunks of the placenta still inside me. So they had to do a bunch of like really, really, really hard pushing on my stomach and like grabbing parts of the placenta out. It was not fun. Even with like half my body being numb, it was not fun. Do not recommend. But in terms of postpartum, I do feel like I was up and walking pretty quick. I had heard a lot of people who had had the epidural, they're like, you can't walk right away and blah, blah, blah. I actually I held my son for about an hour and then was able to get up and walk. And I don't know if that's because I could feel my right side completely. So I was like able to compensate for my left side not having any feeling. But I was able to get up and walk pretty easily. I was able to like go to the bathroom. I was able to do everything normally. I had a much better experience in terms of postpartum and, all of that. I was in so much less pain this time around in terms of like recovery time. Like I was able to do things right away. I felt normal really, really quickly after labor and after birth. It was just really different, I would say. But yeah, in terms of if I was to do it again, would I get epidural or would I go natural? I probably would go epidural, but I would warn them this time that I only got one side numb last time. So maybe it's something to do with the shape of my spine, or maybe it's something to do with the person who placed it. I'm not sure. But I do feel like it was a good experience for me. I really did not hate it. And I do feel like I don't know if the recovery last time was because of the first birth or because of the no epidural, but that alone would make me want to get an epidural again. Just because of the recovery and postpartum, how miserable I was last time. That was not fun. I just wouldn't go through it again. But that is all I have for you guys today. I just wanted to kind of touch on my feelings and thoughts about epidural versus my natural labor and kind of compare and contrast. But yeah, that is all I have for you. That is it. If you have any labor or delivery stories down below, feel free to leave them. I think that as long as we can all get our babies here safely, I don't think there's any shame or harm in getting an epidural or not getting an epidural. I know lots of people who have done both or done one or the other, and either way, your child comes safely, hopefully. So that is all I have for you guys today. I will see you guys next time. And yeah, bye guys.